Welcome. This is Leonard Lee, Managing Director of neXt. Thank you for joining today's Rethink webinar. And in this session, we will be discussing what may be the biggest global security threat of the modern era, Meltdown and Spectre. And for those of you who are not familiar with neXt, let me introduce you to our firm really quickly. We are a San Diego-based boutique consulting and research firm focused on providing experience-based advisory services to inspire our clients' digital future. And we advise across a wide range of digital topics, drawing from the expertise and experience of our executive consultants and analysts. I started neXt with the goal of channeling my 23 years of experience consulting across a wide range of industries and business, technology, and strategy advisory domains, and helping my clients win and move forward with clarity into the cloudy frontier that is our digital future. And I also wanted to work with some great people like our featured neXt principals who will be joining me on this panel discussion. And today, I'm very honored to be joined by neXt principal Akshay Sharma. Akshay is a renowned industry analyst and consultant who has been working with some of the leading tech firms and was a research director with Gartner Inc. for 10 years. And as a principal with neXt, Akshay covers various domains, including blockchain, network and data center technologies, IoT communication, security, and telecom digital transformation. And I'm also honored and excited to introduce Dean Freeman, our newest principal. Dean has a distinguished 17-year career with Gartner as a research vice president with the Semiconductor Group. Dean's research focus was on the semiconductor forecast and leading the Internet of Things Center of Excellence. And we welcome his expertise on various IoT topics and his deep knowledge of the semiconductor industry and market. So Dean, Akshay, thank you both for being on this panel today. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having some great discussion.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
In this session, we will cover the following agenda topics. And if you have any questions, please post a chat message and we will address a couple of questions during the Q&A portion of our program. The first item that we'll discuss is Meltdown and Spectre, the threat we don't want to talk about or don't seem to want to talk about. And we will discuss the nature of the threat beyond Apple, the Internet of Security risk. In this agenda topic, we will talk about the scope and the potential scale of the Meltdown and Spectre threat. And number three, tackling the great digital risk of our time. Here we will talk about what business leaders should do to address the risk and the threat of Meltdown and Spectre. And finally, we will have questions and answers for the audience. Let's move on to our next section here, which is Beyond Apple, the Internet of Security risk. And I like how you suggested that MWC might change their name to Mobile World Congress of Internet Security. When the news of Meltdown and Spectre first broke, the predominant headline was that all of Apple's products were vulnerable to Spectre and Meltdown yet. They jumped on this really quickly and distributed a patch back in November, even before the announcement, for Meltdown, and I think they've had some interim fix for Spectre, and I think Spectre is the more elusive, deeper threat and more difficult to remedy. I was having a LinkedIn exchange at the time. This is like basically when the threat was announced with the CTO of a leading IoT platform company, and I asked a simple question of, well, how will Spectre and Meltdown impact IoT end devices and environment? And this is really what kind of is inspiring this conversation we're having right now. But it set off a huge light bulb in pretty much everyone's head that was participating in that thread. Gentlemen, let's talk about how big this Meltdown Spectre threat may be in terms of scope and scale, because I think, you know, the prevailing conversation or discourse out there is still around, you know, smartphones, smart TVs, and some of these consumer, high-profile consumer products. But, you know, you don't really see this conversation around what I think, and I think we think, is the bigger issue, right? And it's a historical, present, as well as future problem. Maybe we can start with the consumer here and talk about the additional categories that people should be concerned about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're starting to see with IoT, basically a CPU is going to be in almost everything, every appliance, every thermostat, every speaker system with natural language processing. Now refrigerators like Samsung's Hub 3.0. It's a full computer. It's a full LCD screen. It's got access to your video surveillance. But now we're starting to see video surveillance being hacked with the devil's ivy attack. So this thing could be pervasive in almost every appliance and every device that consumers interact with.
Dean, you and I, when we did some collaborations when we were at Gartner, we talked about how devices continue to get smarter and the economics are shifting for smarter devices. What are your thoughts there, especially given that consumer IoT has exploded in the last couple of years? Do you have any thoughts on what the prospects are for the future in terms of the risk exposure?
Yeah, I think for anybody that watched the Super Bowl, the Amazon commercial is a great potential example of what can happen. Amazon lost her voice. So you had all these other celebrities coming in and giving the voice. Well, think about, the Amazon device, if it is exposed, if it has a processor that can be exposed to Spectre or Meltdown, is at risk. So now, any conversation I have is exposed. So the Amazon device can be hijacked by, say, someone, so to speak, a hacker, and they could start potentially ordering things. And granted, it might be tough for them to get them delivered to their house, but let's say you have two houses. One's a vacation home, the other one's your regular address. Well, they start delivering stuff for your vacation home and they know you're not there. So all of a sudden you get this Amazon bill that's, what? I didn't order that. But because you've been able to hack in, your credit card's on file, it's got an address that's ready to send. They know what your password is because they've gotten access to that. So that's kind of the extent of this with respect to the consumer devices, depending on if that microcontroller inside the Amazon Alexas is at risk. And and so that's the type of exposure that we have here. And then you take a look at everything you have on that slide. You've got your oven, you've got your refrigerator, you've got your car, you've got your mixer, you've got your Fitbit, you've got your all
Apple
of your
Watch.
information, Apple Watch. So it's very but I thought we had gone beyond Apple now, but it's a huge potential risk for the consumer. And I go back to a movie, one of the Superman movies with Richard Pryor, and where Richard Pryor came in and he figured out, if I skim that half cent off of everybody's paycheck that they're not getting paid and put it into a bank account, I make a lot of money. Well, it could even be that this is going to be that subtle, type of, because for every transaction, let's add a nickel to it. Let's add a dime to it. Let's add a dollar to it. Let's see if the consumer sees. Let's see if the end user sees. So the exposure here is potentially a huge economic advantage or potential for, as Akshay mentioned earlier, the rogue nations, the hackers, everything else that could be there from a financial perspective.
We've even seen credit cards like the smart cards. The chips have been hacked in the case of the Infineon hack. So it's going to be pervasive, and it may not even be adding 5 cents. Just adding a delay of the transaction can add to can be added to billions of times. So just a slight delay, a point of sale system at a retailer, that gets hacked. I mean, they'll have access to credit cards and people's personal information right there.
Well, yeah, and think about, Samsung's what is it, Hub 3.0, right? That you cited as one of your top picks for CES 2018, and how much intelligence is built into the refrigerator, right? Which is supposed to serve as the hub of the home. These devices, especially these home automation or smart home devices, continue to get more robust. They're not getting dumber, that's for sure. If anything, they're requiring AI and higher compute functions and capabilities. So we can only anticipate that the types of chips that they're going to be using are the ones that are going to be vulnerable to Meltdown and Spectre in the short term, right? But these are great points, and if Alibaba ever tries to go to market with something like Alexa, they should be careful because they have Alipay, right? And vice versa. I think Amazon needs to think twice before they start getting into digital payments, and because that could be a risk. All right, let's move on to the next category, which is business devices. And what we mean by this is the various categories of devices that businesses use. That can be anything from the network to the data center to the security cameras and various other digital systems that enterprise is using. Akshay, what are your thoughts here in terms of the current, present, and future threat profile for this category of devices?
Well, we've seen the servers being hacked, but this is not anything new. Ironically, if you look at WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, his first attack was actually Nortel PBXs back in the 90s. And I'm quoted in the Wall Street Journal saying, watch out. In 2012, I was quoted there saying, on the demise of Nortel, that was with botnets inside Nortel, sending proprietary information outside, that this is time, it's a wake-up call. I was quoted in this Wall Street Journal article at the time saying, we need to apply proper hygiene. We need to, update. We need to have diagnostics and intrusion detection software that analyzes all the logs, who did what, when, and where, and it's truly a wake-up call. And now we're starting to see with things called network function virtualization, NFV, or software-defined everything. To be in a hardware box built and made by an equipment vendor using proprietary silicon, using proprietary operating systems and proprietary languages, back in the day of Nortel or back in the day of Lucent. Now everything is on merchant silicon. Everything is using open source software. Everything is using open standard operating systems and open highly available chip platforms from generic commoditized vendors, which is good. I mean, it's brought the price points down, but the scary part is that vulnerability, if it gets exposed, it can replicate across the entire business, that entire data center having the same architecture vulnerability. The issue could be massive.
Akshay, what I hear as far as enterprise type devices, and if we can call a server a device, there's a lot of focus on the server, but not a lot of talk about the network, right? Because people just assume server, data center. Maybe you can give us an idea of what the threat level is with network equipment. People, when they think about processors, they don't assume that you have processors in a router. And techie folks like you and Dean and myself, we know that you have these types of processors in these devices, but a lot of business folks don't, right? People who have never been in a data center don't really have an idea of that.
Exactly. And in fact, Cisco Systems also went public saying they are exposed to similar types of vulnerabilities because guess what? They use a lot of the same off-the-shelf processors inside their routers. And then with this thing called software-defined networking, where the router can be virtualized and put in a server farm, well, guess what? That server farm, if it has that vulnerability, so does that software running on it in that routing software as well. So this can be multifaceted, this vulnerability.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Let's move on to the next category here, which is industrial devices. And here we're really talking about what a lot of folks call the world of industrial IoT. There's a pretty wide range of devices that are part of this category of the greater world of IoT, I guess. But having worked in oil and gas as well as aerospace defense, that these assets, such as a refinery, such as an airplane, have a lot of silicon in them, right? Many processors that are used to control and actuate various aspects of these devices. Those are probably prone to a risk as well, right? And especially given that there has been a move toward connecting various aspects and components of these devices themselves, such as a jetliner. Many of the subsystems as well as core systems are connected devices, right? And then they are also networked through satellite uplinks as well as internally within the plane itself, whether it's for video, the video entertainment system or Wi-Fi that's being provided within the cabin.
Exactly. In fact, in a past life in the 90s, I worked for Saab Aerospace, for a division called Telelogic that's now part of IBM, where we defined the fly-by-wire standards in the Boeing 777 and in the Airbus standard called AirInc 629 data bus. And the idea was using software to control even the wing flaps, even the movement from the cockpit down to every hydraulic system that's in the plane. And so it would be massively scary to think that these things could be hacked while a pilot's in the air or even on ground. I mean, it's just unfathomable. We heard, back in 2015, the Fiat Chrysler Jeep could be hacked where the braking system could be disabled while a person's driving the Jeep. I mean, it's truly, truly scary to think about it.
Right, exactly. The whole autonomous thing, right? And when you have a picture here of this John Deere earth mover, think about the Rio Tinto automated mines, right? And the whole mine is computer controlled. It's all networked. It's probably like the largest industrial implementation of IoT, probably one of the first too out there, right? Where you see, let's call it a modern day IoT deployment that is being used on a daily basis to fully automate a mine, right? And so you have all this equipment out there that's connected and smart.
Exactly. And we're starting to see the ATM machines have been hacked in certain parts of the world. We're starting to see electronic voting machines have been hacked. And that could truly change elections.
Right. And some of these things are still running on Windows 95. Right?
Exactly.
Well, that's Leonard, it's great that you mentioned that because a lot of building automation systems still run on Windows 95. So imagine if somebody
really
and hack that. Now, granted, those buildings aren't terribly automated, but still, you come in through that, and then some way somehow you're able to access the rest of the building, very similar to the Target hack a few years back,
right?
And you can cause some considerable damage.
Right, and I think that's where people need to start thinking about high risk applications, right? Because in all likelihood, high risk applications are going to be those high value or mission critical applications that would be valuable for someone to attack, right? For whatever purpose, whether it's for monetary gain or say that they're a terrorist and they want to disrupt the economy of a nation that they're trying to attack. I think that's where one of the criteria you have to start looking at, and the way that you need to look at the threat, not just as a security threat, but really a real, let's say, economic or even safety threat.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, great. Hey, let's move on to the threat landscape. One of the things that we want to talk about here, gentlemen, is how Meltdown and the Spectre threat to IoT goes beyond just the devices, right? We talk about the different device categories. I just talked about applications. Maybe we can put a little structure to that thinking and elevate the threat discussion from just being tech device to the next level up, right? Because when we talk about IoT, it's not just about technology. It's these different applications that are enabled by IoT technologies.
Exactly. I mean, and we're going to see newer architectures with 5G coming down the pipe. We're going to see more mobile edge computing, more computing in nano data centers closer to the edge. So while the device itself may have vulnerabilities in its CPU, and then we see vulnerabilities in the Google plexes thousands of miles away, but we're going to even see newer vulnerabilities in between at these new nano data centers closer to the edge.
And yeah, we've killed this digital connected devices thing to death, but I think the other thing that people need to think about are data center and edge computing, right? And I know that, Dean, you have a point of view here that you'd like to share with the audience on, in particular, the edge computing.
Yeah, just to expand on the comments that Akshay made, is that, as artificial intelligence is really driving computing at the edge. And so think of an autonomous vehicle with the number of microcontrollers or actually microprocessors that you have in that car. I think it's greater than 75 right now. Smart lighting has an Intel Atom or greater processor in every single street lamp out there. So as you're starting to get more and more compute power on the edge for the artificial intelligence, and the artificial intelligence is telling your system or creating a scenario that you as a person have to react to, or that autonomous vehicle or those traffic signals need to react to. You're starting to expand that risk greatly if you cannot get the patches on these things in a very quick manner, because those devices also, unless you have gone through some of the steps that Akshay has talked about earlier with respect to having the hygiene, having the security built into your communication system, risk exposure, the risk threat goes up significantly.
Akshay, anything to add to that or in response to Dean's comment there?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we need to now think holistically, and the AI component, while these are getting smarter, these devices with smart cities, smart everything basically, but even the holistic nature of these attacks, the malware detection, the intrusion detection, the security software needs to also adapt and have AI components. So now what we're seeing is behavioral analysis, the simple log files in a router, who did what, when, and where, the IT administrator, what IP address did they log in from? If it's from a rogue nation, like North Korea, well, that's probably something that should have been blocked. What we can do now is think holistically. We need to think out of the box, and our analysis has to be holistic as well. So we're not just probing the device, we're probing the cloud, we're probing the nano data, we're probing applications down to the network, down to even the log files of the IT administrator as well.
Information security and network security is more important than ever.
Exactly.
It's no longer that tiny little investment that you make in your IT budget anymore, right?
And
so
even
let's talk about the third.
Is the McAfee or the Norton or the Kaspersky stuff that we used to buy, that may not be valid anymore. We may need to think of newer solutions.
Right. Even beyond, right, exactly. In fact, what was it? Was it the Microsoft patch? The McAfee, was it McAfee? I think that some antivirus software corrupted or prevented the Meltdown patch from installing, right? And so, obviously there isn't this level of coordination that needs to happen, but even beyond that, like what you're saying, we might have to think in terms of a new security paradigm for our enterprises and ourselves, right?
Exactly.
Not just the enterprises. Individuals need to start thinking about this quite seriously. Yeah, and so the third leg of this lens that we are proposing here for the IoT security threat landscape is the digital service providers, right? Because earlier we mentioned how whether you're an individual or a consumer, you're an enterprise or a government or what have you, we're consuming digital services from vendors, service providers. They're all part of this whole ecosystem that we engage with in our digital lives or our digital work or our digital enterprise or business, as the folks at Gartner would call it. But this is also an important consideration, right? As you start to look at, well, how do I need to shape a strategy around addressing this threat?
Exactly.
Because we all have Dropbox, we all have, we would probably have AWS in our IT portfolios and such.
Yep, and one thing we gotta be vigilant about is not to use the same password in all these different locations that we're at.
If you would like to find out more about the next Curve points of view on this and other digital topics of the day, go to our website. It's www.next-curve.com. You'll find research notes by Dean, Akshay, and other next Curve principals, media and replays of this and other webinars on our site. And to keep up to date on all the great stuff we're doing here at next Curve, follow us on our website by subscribing, and you'll be automatically notified when we publish and post new insights and research. And we'll also be launching a subscription-based channel with exclusive content for our executive members. And we are also on Twitter and YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and friend us on Twitter to get live feeds and coverage of industry conferences that we attend and special next Curve events. And the next conference we'll be attending is Mobile World Congress, and we have a ton of briefings set up, and Akshay and Dean will be there with me in spirit and virtually covering the action there. Taking the first step, we've talked about the remediation, risk assessment and remediation strategy that we recommend that you put in place in reaction to the Meltdown and Spectre threats. Well, if you would like next Curve to advise you on your first step on your Meltdown and Spectre remediation journey, a great way to start is our executive workshop program, which focuses on helping you and your organization develop that holistic strategy that we've been talking about, that remediation plan that we're talking about, and ultimately a roadmap that will get you down the path of remediation. And the outcome of this engagement is a set of deliverables that will be vital in communicating the Meltdown and Spectre risks to your business and to all the internal and external constituents that you're going to need as part of your program. It also supports critical resource and investment decisions that you're going to have to make, and helps you mobilize your organization, partners, and vendors in moving forward on your path to Meltdown, Spectre, risk mitigation, and remediation. We also have a number of other engagement options that can fit the needs of your organization, from custom research projects, executive workshops that we just talked about, and expert panels and inquiries that we provide as well. And so that's a really nice way for you to get in touch with Dean and Akshay and myself to get some spot advisory on the topic of Meltdown and Spectre and how you can go down this path of remediation. Now, if you have any questions, contact me by email or telephone. This is Leonard Lee for a scoping discussion to figure out how next Curve can be part of your next step with Meltdown and Spectre, risk mitigation and remediation.